Writing Out Loud, a program designed to explore in-depth interviews with writers to hear that words have voices. Our hostess for today's program is Teresa Miller, Executive Director for the Oklahoma Center for Poets and Writers at OSU Tulsa.
Hello everyone, I'm Teresa Miller and welcome to Writing Out Loud. You'll never guess who our special guest is today, Mitch Albom. Mitch, thank you so much for being here.
Hi Teresa, nice to be here.
Several years ago, you're watching television, you channel surfing, happened across Nightline, and you hear the name Maury Schwartz. What was that moment like for you?
Well, I didn't know it at the time, but it was life-changing. Maury Schwartz had been an old college professor of mine that I had been very close with at Brandeis University. We had been more like an uncle and a nephew during that time, and then I had left school and gone on to chase all my careers and become a very type AAA personality, and I had lost touch with him, so I really hadn't even heard his name being mentioned before. And I'm flipping the channels, and I hear Ted Koppel say, "Who is Maury Schwartz, and why, after tonight, are so many of you going to care about him?" I said, "Maury Schwartz." And then there was Maury, very thin, sickly-looking version of him, and he was telling Ted Koppel about what it was like to die from Lou Gehrig's disease. And that was the first I even knew that he had Lou Gehrig's disease. And so that began a process that has been over the last 11 years that has taken me places I never thought I would go. I picked up the phone to call him what I thought would be a one-time phone call. I didn't even plan on visiting him. I picked up the phone to just say hello to him, and from that phone call to the first visit, to another visit, to every other Tuesday, all the rest of the Tuesdays of his life, to the book Tuesdays with Maury, to the book The 5 People You Meet in Heaven, to the book For One More Day, all that came out of that night.
What was it about Maury that made him such a remarkable teacher before his illness, during his illness?
He was very human, and he wasn't so interested in, you know, are you getting the text right? Are you memorizing page 114? He wanted to know how you were growing as a human being all the time. And I think he spent far more time in the hours after class talking to kids than he ever did actually in class talking to them. And when you're a college kid, and you know, you're away from home for the first time, it is actually one of the first times adults talk to you like adults. You know, up till then, it's your mother saying, make sure you're home by 11, or make sure you get the car back, or things like that. And all of a sudden, here's this old man, an erudite, academic man, and he talks to me as an adult. I think that's why college professors have such impact on kids, because it's often the first time they have those kind of conversations. And he certainly had that impact on me and many of his other students as well.
At what point did you realize your Tuesday visits needed to be shared with a larger audience?
Oh, I don't know that I ever really thought about it as a larger audience. I only wrote Tuesdays with Maury to pay Maury's medical bills. And that only came about in the third Tuesday or so when I was visiting. I asked him what he feared the most with his disease, and he said, "I fear the debt I'm going to leave my family." Up till then, I didn't even know he had that kind of debt, and I just got an idea that maybe I could write something that would help defray his costs. It wasn't supposed to be some bestseller or anything like that. In fact, we got turned down by almost everywhere we went.
You're kidding.
Oh, everywhere, including places that had published me before, had published my sports books. And I said, "Listen, this is just a labor of love. I just need enough money to pay his medical bills. It'll be a very nice story." No. Not interested. Come back with another sports book. I had people tell me, I won't mention the publisher, but I had a very well-known publisher of some very literate people in America sit in an office and tell me that I had no idea what a memoir was and I was incapable of writing it. And Tuesdays with Maury, I believe, is now the best-selling memoir of all time.
Oh, it is.
But, I mean, that's the kind of reception it got as an idea. So nobody wanted to publish it, and when I finally found one publisher, they printed 25,000 copies, and that's all we thought they would ever sell. It wasn't supposed to be anything like that. So it's not, to answer your question, it's not as if I said, boy, the world needs to hear this. I needed to help my professor, and the only way I could help him was to try to write a book. And when we got the money, I gave it all to him and said, take it all, pay off your bills. That was the end of Tuesdays with Maury for me. That Tuesday when I said, here's the money, pay your bills. Writing the book was just an obligation, you know.
What a wonderful story. Why do you think Tuesdays with Maury resonated with so many readers?
If I had to really explain it, I would say that it's more everybody else's story than it is just mine. It's not that I wrote it so brilliantly. It's not that I'm so interesting, or even that Maury's so interesting. I think most people look at Tuesdays with Maury and say, I had a relationship like that. People will come up to me and they'll take pictures out of their wallets and they'll say, this is my Maury. And they'll show me a grandfather or a teacher or whatever. And they slot their Maury into my Maury slot, and they slot themselves into my spot. And so they see in that book a lot of relationships that they've had in their own life, and a lot of the wisdom that Maury said they've heard in some other shape or form from other people. So I think it's sort of like a glove that fits a lot of people, and people ended up putting that glove on all around the world.
You knew that Maury was dying, and you were prepared for that. He was teaching you how to prepare for that. How hard was it when he actually did pass on?
Well, you know, it was really hard, but one of the ironies of the last day that I visited Maury, and it's one of the things I talk about with this new book, For One More Day,
yes,
because people are always saying, oh, if I had one more day with somebody, if I could only have one more day back. And I say, well, you know, a lot of people do have those days, they just don't take them because they don't really think that they, you know, oh, I'll always be able to see him again, I'll always be able to see him again, I'll go see them at Christmas, I'll see them next summer. Well, even with Maury, who was dying in front of me, on the last Tuesday that I visited him, when he was so sick and so weak, he was just a skeleton, basically. He was so small, he was like a little child's body. I couldn't even carry him to his office where he liked to sit. Even then, on that last Tuesday, the last thing I said to him was, see you next Tuesday. Because I still couldn't accept that I wouldn't get one more lap around the track with him, you know, and I wouldn't get to come back one more Tuesday and finish up whatever I didn't say this past Tuesday, except he didn't last till the next Tuesday. In fact, his funeral was the next Tuesday. And so it was hard, and I always felt bad that I don't think Maury really wanted me to accept that there is an end and you have to say goodbye. And I don't even think I did that at the very end. There was part of me that said, this isn't going to be goodbye. We'll get another chance. So it was hard, but not as hard as some other deaths in my family where people just were gone like that because I had all that time.
Are Tuesdays still special days for you?
Well, I always think of, it's funny, so many things happen on Tuesdays for me, you know, special things that have happened, and I look at the calendar, it's another Tuesday again. Even the fact that, you know, Maury's funeral was on a Tuesday. I've gone and visited his grave up in Boston, and I'll turn around and go, oh, it's Tuesday, and I happen to be here in Boston. So, I don't know, that seems to be my magical day in some way.
Jack Lemmon played Maury in the TV movie. How close did he come to capturing Maury's persona?
Well, it was an interesting story with Jack Lemmon because I went to the set and met him, and he asked if he could come speak to me privately, and I said, sure. And he started asking me some questions about, well, how did Maury handle this when this happened? And the first two questions I thought, well, maybe he's just an actor trying to study the character. But then he said, well, when he got the news, how did he handle it? Did he ever have any bad days? And I said to myself, this man is sick. He's asking me because he must have some disease. I just know it. I talked to enough people already to know how that people talk. And sure enough, he was dying himself during the making of that movie. He had begun suffering from the disease that would kill him a few years later. And so when people asked me to capture how much of Maury to capture, he didn't look like Maury. He didn't speak like Maury. But he had more of that soul and that energy and that curiosity and fear and everything about dying that Maury had than anyone else could probably have because he was living it for real life. And so in that way he captured the essence of what Maury was about in those conversations better than anyone I could ever imagine.
How did Tuesdays with Maury lead to your first novel, The Five People We Meet in Heaven?
Well, as I said, they printed 25,000 copies of Tuesdays with Maury. And I thought I'd be selling them out of the trunk of my car for the rest of my life. But it went on to become something I never could have seen. And then after it started selling millions of copies, the publishers came to me, and they all these same publishers who never wanted anything to do with Tuesdays with Maury only wanted Wednesdays with Maury, you know, or a follow-up, more Maury Part 2, Maury. And I knew I didn't want to do that. I said, you know, I didn't write that book to be a self-help author or a guru or a sequelizer. And so when I began to think of what should I do next, a lot of things kept falling into that category. It looked too much like another Maury book. It looked too much like a follow-up of Maury. And I knew nonfiction, no matter what subject I chose, would get held up to Maury and probably would compare unfavorably because it had become such a big thing. So really for a couple of years I was kind of paralyzed. I mean, I couldn't do anything. I didn't have anything to write. I just said, well, I'm just not going to write anything. And then finally I thought, well, you know what, maybe the way to do this is to just go completely the other route and get as far away from a Maury story as I could. And I had an old uncle of mine whose name was Eddie. He was a World War II veteran, and he was the polar opposite of Maury. He never finished the 8th grade. He was barrel-chested and strong, whereas Maury was very slight and thin. He was a World War II veteran, a soldier. Maury wasn't. And he was a kind of guy who always greets you with a punch. How you doing, buddy boy? He hits you in the arm. And I loved him. As a kid, he was the first strong man that I ever knew. But he never thought he amounted to much in life. He always said, I'm a nothing, I'm a nobody, I never been nowhere, never done nothing. And I always felt that sad for him, and he died thinking that, and I always felt nobody should have to feel that way. They should all feel like there was somebody. So I said, well, maybe there's an idea for a book. I'll create a guy just like him who dies just like he did, but he goes to heaven and he meets these people from his life, and he finds out that he was connected to people in ways that he didn't even realize, and he touched people's lives in ways he didn't realize. And maybe if my uncle is going through this up in heaven, he'll realize that he's not a nobody. And so I sat down to write this book, and, about a quarter of the way through, I realized why there's that old expression, if you're going to write a novel, write what you know, Because here all of a sudden I'm writing about heaven, and I'm writing about a guy in World War II, I'm writing about amusement parks. So it was hard. I took on a really hard subject for a first novel.
Absolutely.
And there were parts I said, what am I doing? But I was comforted by the fact that no one will hold this up and say, oh, it's just like Maury. It was completely different. And that, I was very encouraged. I was very nervous when that book came out. I said, this is nothing like Maury. It's a fable. It's like a fairy tale. And will people read it? And when it ended up with an even bigger audience than Tuesdays with Maury did, that was probably the happiest professional development of my life, because it meant that people were saying, we like your stories, tell us more stories. And it sort of gave me the freedom to write other books, which, like the new one for One More Day and other ones like that. Yeah.
Have you given much thought to the 5 people you might meet in heaven?
Well, if I really followed my own example, some of them would be people that I didn't know. Some of them would be people that I might have had some influence on but didn't realize. And that would be an interesting thing to see again. I would like to see Maury again, because so much has happened since he died, and so much of my life has been tied up in his. And I'd like to ask him, how's everything? How do you think I'm handling everything? Did I do a good job? So I'd like to see him. I have a few relatives who have died that they went away too soon, and I'd like to see them again and discuss it. So I don't know, maybe 3 people I know and 2 people I don't. That would be a nice mix.
And the list is growing. Maybe we should add, the first 10 people you'll meet.
Well, you can't change your own rules as you go along.
You mentioned the new book, For One More Day. It's already a bestseller. That's going to make you feel awfully good.
That's always nice when you get that out of the way right at the beginning. So
tell us about this book.
It kind of grew off the heels of the 5 people you meet in heaven, where people came up to me after that book and said, well, I really love when Eddie gets to meet people from his life, and what I wouldn't give for one more day with somebody, my father, my mother. And I heard that so much that I thought, well, boy, this is a common theme, and I've thought that myself. What would I do if I had one day back with somebody? You ever have those dreams where you dream about somebody who died, and in the dream, you turn to them at one point, you say, you died, you can't be here. Yeah. And they never answered you. You ever notice that? They never. So I thought, well, what if they were here on Earth, and they were like that? And you said, well, how could you be here? You died. And they never really answered you, but you still got this day. What would you do? So I created a story about this boy, Charlie Bonetto, who grows up in the 50s and 60s, worshiping his father and taking his mother for granted. And when he's 11 years old, his father disappears, and his mother is left to sort of bring him up. But he never really appreciates her. He's always chasing the ghost of his father. And even later on in life, when he becomes a man, his mother is always, oh, she's on the phone, tell her I'm not here, and those kinds of things. He's always worshiping his dad, who's never around. And years later, after his mother has died, Charlie's own life has come apart. He's become an alcoholic. He's lost his jobs and his family. And the book begins on the night that he decides he wants to kill himself, because he's found out that his daughter has gotten married and never even bothered to tell him or invite him or whatever. And he just feels, well, what's the point of living? I'm so shut out of everybody's life. He goes all the way back to the small hometown where he grew up to take his life. And he kind of botches the attempt, and he staggers back into his old abandoned house, and he opens the door and he steps inside, and he hears his mother's voice calling him from upstairs like she did when he was a kid and he would come home. And he discovers she's still living there, as if she never died, as if nothing ever happened. And this begins this one last day that they get together, which for her is just another day of chores and things around the neighborhood, but for him is that one chance to, well, I got this day back. What do I ask? What can I find out about my life? Are there secrets that I need to know? And she sort of takes him on this journey that looks like she's not doing anything, but of course she knows exactly what she's doing. And he finds out a lot of things that he needed to know earlier on as to why his life went the way that it did.
She's your first major female character.
Yes, she
How
is.
would you describe her?
Well, I think, you know, I'd written about an old man in Tuesdays with Morrie and a younger man. I'd written about another old man and the 5 people you meet in heaven. I thought it was time, you know, women are half the human race. It was probably time to get around to that. And I have had, my mother has been an enormous influence in my life, and a very powerful, headstrong woman. And a lot of Posey, the woman in the book, that's her nickname, is my mother when she was younger. You know, a lot of the incidents that actually happened in the book happened to me. I mean, they were autobiographical right from my childhood, of a very headstrong mother, you know, determined to protect her children and things like that. And so I used her when I was younger, because I grew up in that era, to sort of formulate the beginning of her character. But then there's a lot of other mothers that I've met over time that are kind of rolled into her, especially when she becomes a single mom, which my mom never thankfully had to become, and what divorce does to families and children and all that. I've seen so much of that in my life, and I've met so many people. It's, you know, in a lot of ways it's a lot more fun to write female characters because they're not afraid to express themselves. You know, Morrie was an oddity. I mean, Morrie talked all the time, but Eddie was more like most guys. You know, he mostly grunted. You know, I said that once when I was writing the 5 people you meet in heaven. I said, "Oh, great, I'm writing about heaven, and I picked a character who grunts. You know, he doesn't even talk a lot. You know, and he's my main character." So having Posey, I mean, she says so much, and she's got so many lessons and things like that to teach, that she was actually a lot of fun to write.
And the book's dedicated to your mom.
It's dedicated to my mom. I got a chance to show it to my mom, and unlike Tuesdays with Morrie, which Morrie never saw, and unlike the 5 people you meet in heaven, which Eddie never saw, this book I was able to give to my mom and say, you know, read this. In between the sentences are a lot of explanations and apologies and things that, you know, maybe you should know. And I was very lucky to have the chance, Teresa, to do that, because a lot of people don't, you know, and that's kind of the point of the book. A lot of people miss that chance to say those things to their parents. They wait, and then their parents are gone. You know, they figure, oh, I'll see them at Christmas, we'll see them next summer, and then next summer doesn't come. And they get that phone call instead, we have some bad news.
Oh, yeah, we've all had it.
We've all had it, and we shouldn't. We really need to grab these days now. You know, whether you need to apologize for something, tell them you love them, explain something, get the coleslaw recipe, you know, whatever it is. Even there's a moment in the book which is very poignant to me where Charlie says to his mother towards the end of this day, "Tell me again how everybody was related to one another, all the grandparents that came over from the old country." And she says, "Charlie, I told you that 1,000 times." But he never listened, you know, he never wrote it down. It was always mom, just being mom. And then after she died, his own daughter asked him once, "How is everybody related to one another? How is Grandma?" And he couldn't answer, you know, because the whole family history was buried in the ground with his mother. And we should never do that. We should grab those chances now. So that's what I hope comes out of this book. In addition, I hope people like it as a book and a story and characters and all that. But I hope people finish the last page, and if they're moved by it, they'll pick up a phone and call whoever it is in their life and say, you know, I'm going to come by this weekend, not next month or something like that.
That's a lot of pressure, isn't it? I mean, when you're aware of this and you think, gosh, this could be my last moment, I get a little dramatic with people.
Well, you don't have to approach it as, you know, listen, I might lose you. So it's more like, you know what, I've been meaning to say something to you for 10 years, and I should say it now. Or, you know what, I've always wondered this about our relationship when we were kids, or what, can I ask you this about it? Or, you know what, this is hard for me to say, but it's so, when you do that, it's like taking a brick off your head. You get it out there and you realize, oh my gosh, and I can't tell you the difference, Teresa. I meet people all over the country, I mean all over the country and world, who have lost people. I'm like the king of meeting people of bereavement.
Yeah.
And I cannot put into words the difference between people who say what needs to be said before those people are gone, their attitude, and the people who didn't, their regret. It's a chasm that's this wide. So you really take it from somebody who talks to a lot of people who lose people. You want to have those conversations now.
You've written a great line, Mitch, that every family is a ghost story. I wonder if you might elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, yeah, it's at the beginning of the book, and I say because there's a ghost involved, you might call this book a ghost story, but every family's a ghost story, and the dead sit at our tables long after they're gone. And I'm not meaning to haunt anybody by that. What I mean by that is the people who raise us, who are then gone because they died, they're still always around. They're influencing your decisions. They're influencing the way you talk, the way you look, the way you interact with people. You talk about them so they stay alive. They sit at the dinner table. I always say at our tables because, to me, I was raised at a dinner table. I mean, we always had to eat together, and our meals were everything. 2-hour, 3-hour-long dinners. You know, that's where I was shaped. And when people are gone from those tables, my grandmother who used to sit there, my uncles who used to sit there, you still feel them there. You know, we talk about them. You can hear their voices. Their decision making becomes your decision making. So even after someone's gone, they're in your heart, they're in your head, they affect the choices that you make in life, and that's what I mean by every family is a ghost story, because you can't tell a family story without somebody who's not here anymore saying, well, my grandmother used to, well, she's a ghost now, right, but she's still affecting you, and so that's what I meant by that.
You were a nationally acclaimed sports writer before you ever got celebrity as a memoirist and as a novelist, and I wonder if writing these books has changed your approach to sports at all.
It has. I don't really work as much in sports as I used to. I'm really just a part-timer now. I work at the same newspaper that gave me my first chance to really be a columnist, and that's the reason I work there, because they gave me the opportunity, the Detroit Free Press. But they're kind enough to not have me there all the time, and they let me just write the bigger stories. But I will say that you do sort of say, why is this so important? You know, why is sports such a big deal to everybody? I mean, you know, I haven't met too many guys, even guys who on their deathbeds, and I meet a lot of people who are close to dying, say, you know, get me the Ohio State score. You know, it's not really the thing that matters most. But having said that, sports is no less a part of the world than business, politics, or anything else. And I feel that you can find good human stories in the sports world as easily as you can find them in politics or in social, issue stories or things like that. So that's what I try to do when I write sports. I try to bring some kind of human element into it, and that's how the books have probably changed my approach to that.
What stands out to you as your best sports story?
I wrote a 15 or 16 part series about the Iditarod dog sled race in Alaska. And I was the only North American reporter to be up there, the continental North American reporter to be up there, and I followed it in a little tiny plane with a Vietnam veteran who was swooped down and go in and scare the mooses, and I went on sleds and I hung around with them, and no one had ever heard of this thing back then, and I wrote it because I read Call of the Wild, and I think, you know, in my life I just thought I wanted to go see this one, and I was so impressed with what people will do for a race and for a sport that has no money in it and no fame in it, and you're freezing and you got snot from your nose and you don't eat and you hallucinate after 11, 12 days. And I wrote it that way, and when I came back to Detroit, remember, I wasn't connected at all with who I was writing for. I was sending dispatches from Alaska every day, and I came back and I found that turned out to be the most popular thing I ever wrote in Detroit. And Detroit is a pretty big sports city.
Oh, yeah.
But I still hear about that 13, 14 years later. I love that Iditarod thing. Go back. And I said, I'm not going back. It was too cold. But I think that was, of all the sports stories I've had a chance to cover, that was the most unique.
Hey, you're also a musician. You're in the Rock Bottom Remainders with Amy Tan and Dave Berry and Ridley Pearson and others. Be honest with us, Mitch, how good a musician's Dave Berry?
Dave's pretty good. I'm glad you asked me about Dave and not some of the other ones, because I couldn't say that about the other ones. But Dave's a pretty good guitar player. Dave played in like college bands and high school bands, things like that. I was a professional musician before I became a journalist, but I've lost a lot of my chops, you know. And we all play. Our rule is, if you know, most bands have like a minimum, like you have to know a certain amount to get in. We have a maximum. If you know too much, you're out. So, you know, only 3 chords, no more, please, and none of those sharp 9s and flat 5s. Just a C, an F, and a G or something like that. And we have fun, and we're very punctual. I always say we're not very good as musicians, but we're always start the show on time. And it raises money for literacy around the country, so why not?
Well, exactly. And I thought in the couple of minutes we have left, you might mention some of the other causes that are very important to you.
Well, one of the things that Maury did teach me, or really impressed on me, was you can't just write a check. You know, he said you have responsibility with who you are to get involved in your community. And you know, I never forgot those words, and from that point forward, I tried to do that. And so I started 3 charities over the years in Detroit. One is a charity that gets inner city kids to study the arts. A second is a volunteer program that organizes big volunteer events once a month, you know, build houses or go to soup kitchens or help at shelters or things like that around the city of Detroit. All this is oriented around my city, Detroit. And the third is one that I started earlier this year for homeless shelters, because at the Super Bowl, which we hosted, they rounded up all the homeless people on Super Bowl weekend and carted them off to get them off the streets. And then on Monday morning, they booted them back into the street, saying, okay, the guests are gone, you can go back in the street. And I just thought that was cruel. And I said, if we can take care of them for 3 days, we can take care of them all year. And so I tried to start a grassroots thing, which thankfully was very well received, and we've turned it into a full-fledged, full-time charity now that funds all the homeless shelters in Detroit.
What a wonderful legacy for Maury and for you.
Well, for Detroit, it doesn't. You know, I'm from the school that the best kind of charity is the one that doesn't have your name on it, and I don't think, you know, you'll never find anything like the Mitch Albom Fund for this or that. That's not the way to do it. You should do good deeds because they're worth doing, and I've been very blessed, and the least I can do is turn some of that back, especially in the town where I live, because Detroit needs it. You know, it's a pretty rough and tumble place sometimes.
Well, we were blessed to have you with us today.
Oh, thanks.
And thank all of you for joining us on Writing Out Loud.